My own son rented out my cabin without telling me. Strangers drank wine on the porch where his mother and I once held hands. That's how I learned my memories had been put up for sale. If you've ever felt like the things you built with love could be taken from you, then I ask, stay with me. Listen to what happened. And if you've been through something like this, drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. Your story matters too. Now, let me take you back to that day. It was a Saturday in early spring. The sky was heavy with gray, the kind that feels like it could rain or clear up at any moment. I'd been restless all week, so I decided to drive up to the cabin by the lake. That place had always been my refuge. My wife and I built it board by board back when our hands were young and calloused, not yet stiff with age. For decades, it held our family's summers, campfires, fishing trips, birthdays. The walls had heard more laughter than I could ever recount. But when I pulled into the gravel driveway, something felt wrong. There was a silver SUV parked there. A newer model, not mine, not my son's. My stomach tightened the way it does when you sense something's about to shift but don't yet know how. I stepped out, gravel crunching under my shoes, and heard it, voices, laughter, music pulsing faintly from inside. I froze, one hand still on the car door. I knew every creak of that cabin, every echo, but these voices, they were strangers. For a moment I thought maybe a mistake. Maybe I'd driven to the wrong cabin, but then I saw the old porch swing. The one my wife used to sit on, humming melodies she never finished. I'd oiled those chains myself last summer. No mistake. This was my cabin. I walked closer. The air carried the smell of steak, sizzling and seasoned. Once that smell meant family. Now it carried something else. Intrusion. I gripped the key in my pocket, the one I'd carried for 30 years. But before I could use it, the screen door opened. A man stepped out. Mid-30s, tan jacket, beer in hand. He looked at me as if I were the stranger. "Can I help you?" he asked. The question stung. Help me on my own porch. "This is my cabin," I said. My voice was calm, but inside my pulse was hammering. He gave a short laugh, more amused than apologetic. "Pretty sure it's the one we booked for the weekend." Booked. That word knocked the air out of me. I shook my head, trying to understand. Booked? What do you mean booked? He pulled out his phone, thumbed the screen, and held it up. There it was, a listing, a glossy picture of my cabin, my porch, even the dent in the railing I'd been meaning to fix. The description called it a rustic lakeside getaway. And at the bottom, under host, was a name I knew, my son's. I stared at the screen, the laughter from inside cutting sharper now. It wasn't just noise, it was betrayal. For a long moment I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My mind was spinning back through the years, trying to reconcile the boy I raised, the boy I carried on my shoulders to see fireworks, the boy I taught to skip rocks across this very lake, with the man who had quietly put a price tag on his family's memories. I stepped back from the porch, my key suddenly heavy in my hand, and felt a chill even though the air was mild. Something in me shifted right there. The cabin wasn't just rented out. It was stolen from me in spirit. I didn't argue with the man on the porch, didn't push past him. I just stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down. And as I listened to strangers laugh in the house my wife and I had built, one thought burned in my chest. If my son had done this without telling me, what else had he already taken? That was the day I realized love, memory, and ownership don't always hold the same weight in a family. The man with the beer didn't invite me in. He just stood there on the porch, shifting his weight like he expected me to walk away. Behind him, the laughter swelled again. A woman's voice, high and carefree, called out something I couldn't make out, then more laughter. It struck me how wrong it all sounded. This wasn't the laughter of family, where you know the rhythm of each chuckle, the reason behind every smile. No, this was loud, unknowing, careless laughter, strangers filling the air of a place that had once been ours. I clenched my key in my hand, but it felt like nothing more than an old piece of metal now. I didn't fit. I was the outsider at my own table. The man took a sip of his beer, eyes darting at me. "Look, mister, I don't want trouble. We paid good money for this place." He raised his phone again as if it were a shield. "See, 2 nights. Lakeside cabin, sleep 6. All legit." I stared at the glowing screen, my own porch railing staring back at me from the photo. The dent from years ago still unfixed. I remembered the day it happened, my son leaning too hard against it during a teenage tantrum, angry at curfews and rules. He'd stormed off after, but I'd laughed quietly, promising myself I'd fix it when things settled down. I never did. And now that dent was part of an online advertisement. I didn't answer the man. I couldn't. My eyes flicked past him into the cabin itself. Through the half-open door I could see a group gathered around my dining table. Young couples, bottles of wine. Someone was tossing dice across the wood surface, the same table where my wife used to set down steaming bowls of stew on winter nights. A memory surged, the first Thanksgiving we'd hosted there. My wife's quilt draped across the back of her chair, the kids piling mashed potatoes onto their plates, the sound of grace whispered before anyone touched a bite. That table had carried the weight of prayers, secrets, arguments, and reconciliations. Now it carried beer cans and dice. I felt something in me break. The man on the porch cleared his throat. If you've got an issue, you need to take it up with the host, not us. The host, my son. His name had sat beneath the listing, plain as day. My own blood had invited strangers into the one place I thought was untouchable. I managed to speak, though my voice was low, like it came from somewhere deep and wounded. The host is my son. The man blinked, uncertain. For the first time he looked uncomfortable. Well then, I guess that's between you two. He stepped back inside, leaving the door half open. The laughter spilled out fuller now. My cabin had a heartbeat again, but it wasn't mine. I stood there for a while, listening. Each laugh felt like a nail driven in, each cheer at the dice roll like a declaration that this place no longer belonged to me. I thought of calling my son right there, demanding answers. But what would I say? What would he say? Instead, I sat down on the porch step. The wood was rough beneath me. I set the key beside me, its metal catching the gray light. For 30 years, that key had meant belonging. Now it was nothing more than a trinket. I tried to breathe, to steady myself. The lake stretched quiet beyond the trees, indifferent to my turmoil. Birds cut across the water, calling out like they always had. Nature didn't care whose name was typed beneath that online listing. But I cared, and that care sat inside me, heavy, pressing against my ribs. After a long while, I picked the key back up and slipped it into my pocket. My fingers lingered there, curled tight around it, as if squeezing could bring back what was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. The cabin's lights glowed in the distance across the water. I sat in my car by the roadside, watching shadows move past the curtains, hearing faint bursts of music. They were inside, living out a weekend of fun, while I, its rightful owner, sat outside like a ghost. I opened my phone, scrolled to the Airbnb app. I'd never used it before, never thought I'd need to, but now I did. I typed in the location. My heart hammered when the listing appeared: rustic lakeside getaway. The photos were all mine, the chipped paint, the quilt still hanging on the porch swing, my memories reduced to amenities. At the bottom of the listing was a button: book now. I stared at it, my finger hovering. My son thought he could sell my past without asking, but what if I turned the table? What if the next guest who walked through that door was me? The thought both terrified and thrilled me. And in that sleepless night, with the cabin's lights flickering across the lake, I pressed the button. When you feel betrayed by your own blood, sometimes the only way forward is to step into the very betrayal itself. I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know what I'd find. But I knew this. The next time I crossed that porch, I wouldn't be caught off guard. Because the next time I would be the guest. When the day of my booking arrived, the lake wore a different face. The water was still like glass, and the pines stood hushed as though waiting for something to happen. I parked at the edge of the drive, suitcase in hand, and looked toward the cabin that had once been mine without question. Now it was a battlefield. I'd spent the week rehearsing what I might say. Lines rose and fell in my head. Sometimes I was calm. This isn't about money, it's about respect. Other times, I was sharp, ready to cut deep. How dare you sell your mother's memory for a weekend fee? But when the moment came, none of those words felt steady in my throat. The cabin looked the same, yet it wasn't. The porch swing still creaked in the breeze. The dented railing still leaned slightly, stubborn as ever. But behind the curtains I saw movement, shadows of people who didn't belong there, my son's guests, my son's strangers. I climbed the porch steps slowly. Each board groaned beneath my weight as if the wood itself remembered me, remembered the years I had carried lumber and nails up these same steps. I lifted my suitcase higher, and with it, a plan I hadn't fully admitted to myself. I knocked, firm, deliberate. The kind of knock that says, I am not a visitor, I am someone you should know. The door opened. My son stood there. His face froze when he saw me, like a boy caught stealing from the cookie jar, except he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man in his 30s, his jawline set hard, his eyes darting. Behind him, laughter faltered as the guests noticed the sudden quiet at the door. "Dad," his voice cracked with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" I lifted my suitcase, held it just enough for him to see, checking in. For a second he didn't understand. His brow furrowed, then realization struck. His mouth opened, then shut. He stepped onto the porch, pulling the door halfway closed behind him as though shielding the guests inside from what was about to unfold. "Dad," he hissed under his breath, "this isn't funny." "I'm not laughing," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, calmer than I felt. "I booked the cabin through your listing." He stared at me, searching for some weakness, some crack in the armor, but I held his gaze. I wanted him to see that I wasn't just an old man with fading strength. I was still the one who built these walls. "You shouldn't have done that," he muttered. "No," I answered. "You shouldn't have." A long silence hung between us. From inside came the muffled sound of dice rolling across the table, a cheer erupting. It cut through the tension like a knife. I looked past his shoulder into the cabin. For a moment, I saw not strangers but flashes of the past. My wife's hand setting down bowls of stew, my son's laughter when he was still small enough to sit on my lap, the glimmer of candlelight on winter nights. All those memories pressed against me, urging me to claim them back. "Dad, you don't understand," he said finally. "It's just a way to make extra money. The place was sitting empty. You barely come here anymore." I let the words settle like ashes. Empty, that's what he thought. That because my body wasn't in the cabin every weekend, it no longer carried my spirit. That absence was permission to sell. "You think because I wasn't here it stopped being mine?" I asked. He flinched. "I built this place for us," I continued, my voice rising, "for your mother, for you. And you put it on an app like it was some roadside motel." His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The guests inside grew curious. The door nudged open and a woman peeked out. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. I turned to her, offered a smile I didn't feel. "Just fine, I'm checking in." She blinked, confused, then stepped back. My son's face flushed red. "You're embarrassing me." I shook my head. "No, son, you embarrassed yourself when you chose strangers over family." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He looked like a man cornered, and in truth he was. He hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined I'd step into the trap he'd set for others. I placed my suitcase on the porch boards, the sound sharp and final. "I'm staying, and if you've got a problem with that, you'll have to explain it to your guests." His mouth opened, but no words came. Behind him, the laughter had faded entirely. The cabin, once loud with strangers, was now heavy with silence. I picked up the key from my pocket, the same one I'd carried all those years, and held it up. "This still opens the door," I said, "and until the day I choose otherwise, it always will." I stepped past him then, not with force but with certainty. The porch groaned, the door swung wider, and the air inside hit me. The mingled scent of wine and grilled meat, layered over the faint memory of cedar and ash. The guests looked at me, startled. My son stood frozen, powerless. And in that moment I knew this wasn't just about a cabin. It was about respect, about whether a father's years of labor and love could be reduced to a nightly rate. I rolled my suitcase further inside, the wheels clicking across the wood floor, and turned back once more. "Welcome to my home," I said quietly. And with that, the confrontation began. Inside the cabin, the air felt heavier than I remembered. Not with smoke or dust, but with a tension so thick it clung to my skin. A half-dozen strangers sat around our dining table, where holiday meals once stretched late into the night. They looked at me with the awkward politeness of people caught in the middle of something they didn't sign up for. One of them, a woman with a glass of wine, set it down carefully as if not to break the moment. Another man cleared his throat. Is everything all right here?" I didn't answer him. My eyes stayed on my son. "Show me," I said. He frowned. "What? Show me the listing." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Dad, this isn't." "Don't tell me what it isn't," I interrupted. My voice surprised even me, calm but sharp as a nail driven straight. "Show me." For a moment, the only sound was the faint tick of the old wall clock, still hanging where my wife once placed it. My son shifted uncomfortably, then pulled his phone from his pocket. He swiped at the screen, his jaw tightening, his lips pressed in a thin line. Finally, he turned it toward me. And there it was, my cabin. Photographs I hadn't taken, but photographs of my life all the same. The porch swing, its chains rusting at the edges. The dented railing glaring back like a scar. The living room stripped of family photos, dressed instead with words like rustic charm and perfect for couples. Scrolling down, I saw a description. "This lakeside retreat offers comfort, quiet, and timeless beauty. Hosted by," and then his name. My son's name. I swallowed hard. "You wrote this?" He shrugged, defensive. "It's just words." "Just words," I repeated. I let the phone hover in my hands, the glow of the screen casting a cold light across my fingers. "These words sold your mother's quilt as a backdrop. They sold our memories as atmosphere. They sold me out of my own home." A silence fell across the room. The strangers looked down at their laps, their glasses, their dice. No one dared speak. My son ran a hand through his hair, restless. "Dad, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's not like anyone's taking it away from you. It's still yours. I just thought it could help. Bring in some money. Put the place to use." I shook my head slowly. "To use? This cabin isn't some idle tool lying in a shed. It's not a hammer. It's not a lawnmower. It's the sum of years. Do you understand that?" He looked at me then, his eyes flickering with something, anger, maybe shame, maybe both. "You never come here anymore. You left it sitting empty. What's the point of having a place no one uses?" The word stung deeper than I expected. Empty. That was how he saw it. A house without bodies in it was worthless. A memory without witnesses was disposable. I turned the phone back toward him, my hand trembling slightly. "You think you're clever, but you forgot something." He frowned. "What's that?" I pressed the phone into his chest. "The deed is still in my name." He froze. The guests looked up again, curiosity flickering across their faces. The room seemed to hold its breath. "I never signed it over," I continued, my voice low but firm. "Not to you, not to anyone. You can list it on every app you like, but at the end of the day, this place doesn't belong to Airbnb. It doesn't belong to strangers. It belongs to me." My son's face darkened. "Dad, you don't get it. This is the way things work now. You can't just let property sit. You have to leverage it, maximize it. That's what everyone's doing." I let out a bitter laugh, short and hollow. "Everyone? Since when did everyone matter more than family? Since when did profit outweigh respect?" The clock ticked on. The wine sat untouched. The dice lay abandoned on the table. Every eye in that room shifted between us as if they were watching a play unfold. Finally, I took a step back, letting the silence hang heavy. "You listed it without asking. You let strangers into our story. That's not just business, that's betrayal." For a long moment he said nothing. His phone slipped back into his pocket. His shoulders sagged, but his jaw stayed clenched, pride refusing to bend. I turned toward the door, the cool evening air slipping through the crack. "I'll stay the weekend," I said quietly, "since I paid for it." The guests exchanged glances. My son stared at me, speechless. And with that, I wheeled my suitcase across the threshold and into the cabin, claiming space in a house I had never surrendered. But in my chest, one thought burned, unresolved. If my son could sell out my cabin without asking, what else was he willing to sell? That night, my son insisted we drive back to his house for dinner. He didn't say it was to avoid the strangers still lounging in my cabin, but I knew. Better to argue behind closed doors than in front of witnesses. The ride there was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires against the road. I watched the trees blur past, the same trees I'd driven by 100 times before, yet tonight they felt unfamiliar, like I had crossed into a world where nothing held steady anymore. When we pulled into his driveway, the porch light spilled yellow across the steps. His wife stood in the doorway, arms crossed, already knowing something was wrong. The tension on his face gave it away. We sat down at the dinner table. It should have been warm, family, food, comfort. Instead, it was cold, brittle. The clink of silverware against plates sounded louder than any words. My daughter-in-law placed a dish of roasted chicken in the center, then folded her arms, leaning back as though the meal wasn't really for sharing. I picked at the food, appetite gone. Finally, I looked up at my son. "Why?" he sighed. "Dad, I told you, the cabin was just sitting there. I thought, why not make it useful? People love places like that. Rustic, quiet, by the water. We could make some money off it." I set my fork down carefully so it didn't clatter. He shifted uncomfortably. "All right, me. I thought I could make some money off it, but it's not like it hurts you. You don't even go there much anymore." The words landed like stones. Don't go there much anymore. As if absence erased ownership. As if years of sweat and sacrifice could be written off because I wasn't there every weekend. "That cabin," I said slowly, "was never built to be rented. It was built for family. For your mother, for you." His wife gave a sharp laugh. "Oh, come on, it's just a house. It's not some sacred temple." I turned my gaze to her steady. "It may be just a house to you, but to me it's 30 years of memories. Do you sell those too?" The table fell silent, even she couldn't answer. My son tried again, softer this time. "Dad, I didn't mean to disrespect you. I just thought with bills, with everything these days, it made sense. I didn't think you'd care." That cut deeper than anything else. Didn't think I'd care. I cared enough to build it with my bare hands. I cared enough to keep it standing through storms and winters. I cared enough to sit there alone after your mother passed, just to feel her presence in the walls. I didn't say all of that. I couldn't. Instead, I asked, "Did you really think I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't find out?" He looked down at his plate. His wife muttered, "Well, you weren't supposed to be there this weekend." There it was, the truth spoken without shame. I wasn't supposed to be there. My absence had become permission. My silence had become consent. The air around us thickened. Forks scraped. Glasses clinked, but no one spoke. Finally, I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not angry about the money," I said quietly. "I'm angry because you didn't ask, because you treated me like I was already gone." The room went still. My son raised his head, guilt flickering in his eyes. For a brief moment I thought he might apologize, but the words never came. Pride held them back. We ate the rest of the meal in near silence. Only the clock on the wall dared to speak. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound measured the distance growing wider between us. When dinner ended, I stood, placing my napkin neatly on the table. "Thank you for the meal," I said. My voice was steady, but inside my chest ached with something deeper than anger. It was grief. Grief for a bond unraveling. As I walked toward the door, I paused. "I'll be staying at the cabin this weekend," I said without looking back. "After all, I've already paid for it." The words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't wait for a reply. Stepping outside, the cool night air met me like an old friend. The stars blinked overhead, steady and indifferent. My son's house glowed behind me, but I didn't turn. Because in that silence, in that fragile pause between father and son, I realized something chilling. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. That night I couldn't sleep. Back at my small house in town, the bed felt colder than usual. I lay there in the dark, the ceiling fan spinning overhead, my chest heavy with all the words left unsaid at dinner. The silence pressed in on me, and all I could hear was the echo of my son's voice. "You don't even go there much anymore." It stung, because it was partly true. I hadn't gone to the cabin as often these past few years. Not since my wife passed. Walking through those rooms alone had felt like picking at a wound. Every chair, every photograph, every quilt carried her absence. Sometimes grief makes you turn away from the things you love most, and maybe I had, but that didn't mean I'd stopped caring. It didn't mean the place was up for sale. I turned onto my side, staring at the faint glow of my phone charging on the nightstand. The thought gnawed at me. Strangers were still there, sitting around my table, sleeping in my bedsheets, laughing in the space where my family once prayed. I sat up, restless, and reached for the phone. The screen lit the room with a blue glow. My fingers hovered for a moment, then opened the Airbnb app I had downloaded earlier. It still felt strange, this world of listings and ratings, of hosts and guests. A marketplace for memories. I typed in the location, and there it was. Rustic lakeside getaway. A handful of 5-star reviews. Charming cabin with a beautiful view. Loved the cozy atmosphere, would stay again. Each word twisted like a blade. They were talking about my wife's quilt, my sweat on the porch boards, my hands that had nailed those walls together. Scrolling through the pictures, I recognized every corner. The fireplace where we'd roasted marshmallows. The loft where my son used to sleep, kicking off the blankets in the summer heat. Even the porch railing still dented, advertised now as authentic rustic character. I felt anger surge, but beneath it something else stirred, resolve. If my son thought he could reduce my life's work to a weekend rental, he'd forgotten who built it in the first place. He'd forgotten the man who taught him how to hammer a nail straight, how to steady a beam. He'd mistaken silence for surrender. I wasn't surrendering. I scrolled to the bottom of the listing. The green button blinked back at me, book now. My finger hovered. For a long moment, I thought of what it would mean. Booking my own cabin, paying money to stay in a place that already bore my name on the deed. It was absurd. Humiliating even, but at the same time it was power. It was a way to step inside the game my son had started, and maybe, just maybe, turn it against him. I tapped the button. A small circle spun, loading. My heart beat in time with it. When the screen finally confirmed my reservation, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not yet, but momentum, a quiet promise that I wasn't finished. I set the phone down and leaned back against the headboard. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline, from the sudden knowledge that I still had moves to make. The fan whirred above me, steady, indifferent. Outside, a car passed, its headlights flashing briefly across the walls. Life in town went on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I thought of my wife again, how she used to remind me when we argued with our son during his teenage years that patience was a kind of strength. Don't fight every battle head on, she'd whisper. Sometimes you win by waiting, sometimes by outsmarting. I closed my eyes, hearing her voice, soft as wind through the pines. She would have been heartbroken to see what had become of our family, but she would also have smiled at the spark in me now. That spark she always believed was there, even when I doubted it myself. When morning came, I rose with the sun. I poured coffee into a chipped mug, the one I'd kept since she died, and sat by the window. The reservation email blinked in my inbox. Check-in, Friday, 3 p.m. I sipped the coffee slowly, letting the bitterness ground me. My son thought he was clever, thought I was too old, too tired, too quiet to notice. He was wrong. This weekend, I wouldn't just walk back into the cabin. I would walk back into the story he thought he controlled. And when I crossed that porch, suitcase in hand, it would no longer be as a father asking permission. It would be as a guest who knew more than the host ever expected. I set the mug down, steadying myself. The road ahead wasn't clear yet. I didn't know what words would be spoken, what truths uncovered. But I knew one thing for certain. The cabin wasn't finished with me, and I wasn't finished with my son. Friday afternoon, the sun glared off the lake like shards of glass. The pines swayed lightly, and the gravel under my tires crunched with a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. I was coming home, only this time under the name of a guest. My suitcase sat in the backseat, packed neatly. A couple of shirts, a razor, the quilt my wife had sewn years ago. I didn't need much. What I carried wasn't clothes, but a quiet determination. When I pulled into the driveway, the same silver SUV was there, along with another car I didn't recognize. Music drifted faintly from inside, laughter too, the sound of young voices. Once again, strangers had claimed my cabin. Only today they were expecting a guest. Me. I got out slowly, rolling my suitcase behind me. Each step across the gravel felt heavier than it should. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the strange weight of the moment. This wasn't how I'd ever imagined returning to the cabin, booking my own place like a traveler passing through. Still, I knew it was the only way to face the truth head-on. I climbed the porch steps and knocked firmly twice. The door opened, and there he was, my son, holding a phone in his hand, eyes scanning the screen. He looked up and froze. For a moment we just stared at each other, father and son, a silence so sharp you could almost hear it cut the air. "Dad." His voice cracked. I lifted the folded printout of the booking confirmation. My name glowed back at him from the page, black letters on white: paid, approved, guest. "Checking in," I said quietly. Behind him, voices faltered. Someone laughed nervously, not knowing why the mood had shifted. Another voice asked, "Who is it?" But neither of us moved. His face flushed, his jaw clenched. You booked it." "That's right," I said. "You listed it, I booked it. That makes me your guest." His grip tightened around the phone. He stepped outside quickly, closing the door halfway behind him. The porch boards groaned under his weight. "This isn't funny," he whispered harshly. "I'm not laughing," I replied. We stood there just inches apart, the air thick with everything unspoken between us. Years of love, years of disappointment, years of pride colliding in one fragile moment. Finally, he glanced at the paper again. "You really paid?" "Every penny." He shook his head, incredulous. "You could have just called me." "And you," I said firmly, "could have just asked me before you rented out what doesn't belong to you." The door cracked open wider. A young couple peeked out, eyes wide with curiosity. "Is everything okay?" the woman asked softly. I turned to her, managing a smile. Just the host greeting his guest. Her eyes flickered between us, unsure whether to laugh. She stepped back, the door swinging open now. And suddenly I could see all of them, the guests around the table, their faces puzzled. My son's face tightened. "You're making a scene." "No," I said. "You made a scene when you sold your family's memories to strangers. I'm just walking into it." I wheeled my suitcase forward, the sound of the wheels clicking against the wooden porch. My son moved slightly as if to block me, but then stopped. He didn't have the words. He didn't have the right. Inside, the cabin looked both exactly the same and completely different. Wine bottles on the table, dice scattered across the wood, music buzzing from a Bluetooth speaker. But beneath it all, the bones of the place were still mine. Every groove in the floorboards, every beam in the ceiling, every whisper of cedar in the air belonged to me. I set my suitcase down near the fireplace, turned back toward him and said, "I'll be staying the weekend, like any other guest." The guests exchanged glances. One of them chuckled nervously. My son's face burned red, anger mixing with something else, fear perhaps. He'd never expected me to fight back like this. For the rest of the evening, the cabin hummed with unease. I unpacked my things slowly, deliberately, claiming space in every gesture. My wife's quilt folded across the chair. My mug set by the sink. Small acts, but heavy with meaning. The others tried to laugh, to play their games, but the air was different now. They knew they were caught in something larger than a rental dispute. They were witnesses to a fracture between father and son. Later that night, I sat on the porch swing, the lake stretching quiet under the moon. The dent in the railing gleamed faintly, a reminder of years gone by. Inside, I could hear murmurs, hushed voices, my son trying to explain what couldn't be explained. And I thought to myself, this was only the beginning, because stepping back into the cabin as a guest wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a reckoning. The cabin had never felt so crowded. Not with bodies, though there were 6 of us now, but with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't rest. It hovers, tightens, presses. I sat at the far end of the dining table, the very table where my wife once set steaming bowls of stew, where prayers once began every meal. Tonight it carried half-empty wine bottles, a scattering of dice, and a strange unease that no one wanted to name. The guests whispered among themselves, trying not to let me hear, but a father's ears are trained to catch the quiet things, the sigh of a son in trouble, the whispered argument of a child who doesn't want to go to bed. Their voices were soft, but not soft enough. "Is this legal? One man murmured. I thought he owned it, another replied. Awkward, someone else added, her voice dropping into a nervous laugh. I sipped water from a glass, letting their words hang in the air like smoke. My son sat opposite me, jaw tight, eyes fixed on his plate though he wasn't eating. His hands drummed lightly on the table, an old habit from childhood whenever he felt cornered. Everything's fine, he said finally, though he didn't look up. His words fell flat, unconvincing. One of the women leaned closer to her partner. It doesn't feel fine, she whispered. I set my glass down gently. You're right, I said. The table went still. All eyes shifted to me. It doesn't feel fine at all. My son shot me a warning glance. Dad, but I continued. This cabin was never built to be a business. It was built to be a home, a place where my family could be safe, where memories could outlive us. And now, I gestured to the bottles, the dice, the phones glowing with notifications. Now it's become a backdrop for weekends. The room went quiet. Even the Bluetooth speaker had fallen silent, battery dead. Only the faint tick of the clock filled the pause. One of the men cleared his throat. We're sorry, he said awkwardly. We didn't know. I shook my head. You don't need to apologize. You booked what was offered. You came here for peace, for laughter. That's not your fault. Their shoulders eased a little, but the unease remained, because they knew, as I did, that they were no longer simply guests on vacation. They were witnesses to something larger, something that had cracked deep inside these walls. My son finally looked up, his voice sharp. This isn't the time, Dad. They don't need to hear this. I leaned forward, steady. No, son, they do, because they are part of it now. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. A couple stood, muttering about needing air, and slipped onto the porch. Their whispers carried through the screen door. Feels like we walked into a family war. And maybe they had. I sat back, letting the weight of my words settle. My son rubbed his forehead, frustration flashing across his face. You're making me look bad, he muttered. I held his gaze. No, you made yourself look bad. All I did was show up. His fists tightened, knuckles pale. For a moment I thought he might slam the table, but he didn't. He just sat there, stewing in a silence more telling than any outburst. The night stretched long. One by one the guests excused themselves, retreating to their rooms. Their doors clicked shut, muffling their whispers, leaving only my son and me in the dim light of the dining room. The candles flickered low, shadows stretching long against the walls. He finally spoke, his voice low, almost pleading. Why couldn't you just let it go? I looked at him, really looked. The boy I'd once carried on my shoulders, the man now hardened by pride and fear. My heart ached. Because some things aren't meant to be let go, son. Some things you fight for. He didn't answer. He pushed his chair back sharply, the scrape loud against the wood, and walked away without a word. The door to his room shut hard, rattling the frame. And I sat there alone at the table, the ghosts of laughter and prayer echoing in my mind. The cabin was mine again, at least in spirit, but the cost was rising, and I didn't yet know how high it would go. Through the thin walls I heard the guests whisper again. He's right, you know, it doesn't feel right. Their words lingered like smoke, curling in the silence. And I thought, if strangers could see the truth so clearly, why couldn't my own son? The next morning the cabin was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm but still carries the weight of thunder in the distance. The guests moved around with hushed voices, avoiding eye contact with me. They made coffee, toasted bread, packed their bags. One couple whispered that they might cut their trip short. I couldn't blame them. They'd come for a weekend retreat, not a front row seat to a family war. My son avoided me. He busied himself with cleaning dishes, clattering pans louder than necessary. Every movement carried his anger. He wouldn't look at me, but I knew his thoughts. If Dad would just leave, everything would go back to normal. But nothing about this was normal, and I wasn't leaving. Instead, I reached into my suitcase and pulled out a folder I'd carried for years. The edges were worn, the papers inside yellowed slightly, but the words still mattered. They mattered more now than ever. I laid it on the dining table, the same table that had seen prayers, arguments, celebrations. The sound of the folder hitting the wood drew every eye in the room. "What's that?" my son asked, suspicion lacing his voice. I slid the papers toward him. the deed, and more importantly, the clause. He frowned, reluctant, but opened the folder anyway. His eyes scanned the lines, the legal words printed decades ago. His brow furrowed, his lips moved as he read silently. Finally, I spoke. Your mother and I had it written when we bought the cabin. It states clearly, the property may never be leased, rented, or sublet without written consent of both owners. I let the words hang there. Both owners. His head jerked up. That's ridiculous. Nobody enforces that stuff. I met his gaze steady. I do. The guests shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered, he's right, you know, that's binding. Another muttered, we could get in trouble staying here. My son's face darkened. Dad, this is outdated. Times have changed. People rent properties all the time now. I tapped the paper gently. Times may change, but signatures don't. Your mother signed this, I signed this, and neither of us signed it away. His jaw clenched. He pushed the folder back toward me too hard, almost sending it off the edge of the table. So what? You're going to sue your own son? The question cut deep, not because of what it suggested, but because of how easily he asked it, as if legal battles were simpler than respect. I steadied my voice. I don't want to sue you. I don't want courts or lawyers. What I want is for you to remember that this cabin isn't just a piece of property. It's the heart of our family, and you can't sell the heart of a family without killing it. The guests sat frozen, eyes darting between us. They weren't just visitors anymore, they were witnesses. Witnesses to the fracture, witnesses to the truth. One of the women broke the silence. Maybe we should go, she whispered. But I shook my head. No, stay, because maybe he needs to hear this in front of others. My son's face burned red. You're humiliating me. I leaned forward, voice low, almost gentle. No, son, you humiliated yourself when you put this cabin online for strangers before speaking to your own father. I'm simply holding up the mirror. His hands curled into fists. He looked like he might explode, but before he could speak, I tapped the clause again. You think I didn't notice? That I wouldn't care? Well, I care enough to keep this safe. Safe from strangers, safe from greed, even safe from you if I have to. He stood abruptly, chair scraping loud across the floor. This is insane. You're living in the past. Maybe, I admitted. But the past is what built this place, and without it you wouldn't even have a present to sell. The room fell silent again. The guests looked uneasy, gathering their things. My son stormed toward the porch, muttering under his breath. The door slammed behind him, rattling the frame. I sat there, alone with the folder, my hand resting on the clause my wife and I had once signed with hope. I whispered her name under my breath as if she could hear me. And for the first time in years, I felt like she was right there, reminding me of what mattered. But the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Because a piece of paper might prove the law, but it wouldn't fix a broken bond. Yep. The slam of the door shook the cabin walls. My son's footsteps pounded across the porch like gunfire. For a moment, the guests and I sat frozen inside, the silence sharp as broken glass. I stared at the folder still lying on the table, the clause staring back at me in black ink. My wife's signature curved across the page, steady, unshaken. Mine beside it, faded but firm, proof that our intentions still stood. Then the door burst open again. My son stormed in, face red, chest heaving, eyes flashing with something darker than anger. He jabbed a finger at me. You planned this, he shouted. You wanted to embarrass me in front of everyone. You set me up. The guests recoiled, shrinking back in their chairs. One woman whispered, maybe we should leave. But I didn't move. I stayed seated, calm, though inside my heart pounded hard enough to shake me. I didn't set you up, I said quietly. You did that yourself. Don't you dare, he snapped. His voice cracked with rage, but beneath it I heard something else, fear. You never gave me a chance. You never trusted me to handle things. Always holding on, always treating me like I can't do anything on my own. I met his gaze steady. You think renting out the cabin proves you're independent, that betraying your father earns respect. That's not strength, son. That's weakness dressed up as ambition. His fist came down hard on the table, rattling the glasses, sending dice skittering across the wood. The guests gasped. A wine bottle tipped, spilling red across the grain like blood. You don't get it, he roared. You've had everything your way for decades. You built this place, you wrote the rules, you held the keys, but now it's my turn. And I won't let some old piece of paper tell me what I can or can't do. His words cut deeper than I expected. Some old piece of paper, as if my wife's name, her memory, was nothing more than ink, as if the promises we made could be swept aside because the world had changed. I stood then slowly, deliberately. My chair scraped back, steady against the floor. My voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "Son," I said, "this isn't about paper, this is about respect, about whether you see me as a father or as an obstacle in your way." He looked at me, chest rising and falling fast, eyes burning. For a moment, I thought he might break, that he might see. But instead, he grabbed the wine glass nearest him and hurled it against the wall, shattered crimson dripping down the wood like a wound. The guests jumped to their feet. One man muttered, "We're not staying for this." They hurried to gather their things, shoving clothes into bags, avoiding our eyes. My son didn't stop them. He only glared at me, breathing hard, fists clenched. "You think you've won, don't you?" he spat. I shook my head. "There's no winning in this, son. There's only losing. And right now, you're losing more than you realize." His face twisted, fury and something like desperation mingling. "You'll regret this," he hissed before storming out again. The door slammed once more, rattling the frame so hard dust shook loose from the ceiling beams. The cabin echoed with silence. The guests' hurried footsteps faded as they left, their car doors slamming, engines starting, tires crunching down the gravel drive. Soon it was just me, alone in the quiet. The spilled wine stained the table, a dark reminder of how quickly joy could sour into anger. I reached for a rag, wiped it slowly as if scrubbing at the memory itself. But the red wouldn't fade entirely. Some marks don't. I sank back into my chair, exhausted. My son's fury still rang in my ears. His words, "You'll regret this," hung heavy, like a storm cloud refusing to pass. And as night fell, with shadows stretching long across the cabin floor, I realized something. The battle for respect had only ignited a deeper war. Because when pride burns hotter than love, fury doesn't end with shouting. It waits. It festers. And it comes back stronger. The cabin was quiet again after the guests left. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear things you don't want to, your own heartbeat, your own regrets, the echo of words that cut too deep. I sat at the table, staring at the wine stain that spread across the wood like a scar. My son's rage still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. I could almost feel it pressing against the walls, daring me to crumble. But I didn't. I reached for the folder again. The deed, the clause, proof that the cabin was still mine. I placed it carefully in the center of the table, not hidden, not tucked away, out in the open, waiting, because I knew he'd be back. Pride always comes back, and he did. The door creaked open an hour later. My son stepped inside, shoulders tense, eyes darting around the empty cabin. The fury from earlier was still there, but it had dulled into something else. Shame, maybe. Or fear of losing what he thought was his. He looked at the table, at the folder lying there like a challenge. His jaw tightened, still waving that around. I shook my head. "No, just leaving it where it belongs, in plain sight, like the truth." He scoffed, but his voice was quieter now. "You can't keep holding onto this forever." "I don't have to hold onto it," I said. "The law holds it for me. The memories hold it for me. The respect I've earned holds it for me. You're the one trying to pry it out of hands that never let go." He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if afraid the empty cabin might overhear. "Why are you doing this, Dad? Why now?" I studied him, this man who once was a boy chasing fireflies outside these very windows. My chest ached. "Because you made me invisible. You treated me like I didn't matter anymore. And when a father becomes invisible to his own son, he has no choice but to remind him." His lips parted, but no words came. He looked away, down at the stain on the table, the rag I'd left beside it. His fists unclenched slightly. And that's when I made the call. I reached for the old landline phone mounted on the wall. The receiver was cool in my hand. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, the number of a family friend, a lawyer who had stood beside me when the cabin was first purchased. My son's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Making sure the witnesses aren't just strangers who left," I said calmly. making sure someone who matters hears what's happening here. He lunged forward, snatching the receiver from my hand. Stop it, you can't drag other people into this. I looked at him steady. You already did the moment you put this place online. You dragged strangers into our family's heart. Now you'll face someone who knows the truth. For a long moment we wrestled with silence. His grip on the phone loosened, then dropped. He set it back on the hook with a sharp clack. His chest rose and fell fast. Dad, he whispered, can't you just trust me? I let the question hang. Then I answered softly, trust is earned, son, not taken, and right now you've lost more of it than you realize. His shoulders sagged. He slumped into a chair across from me, his anger deflating like air from a balloon. For the first time in days, I saw not a man fighting for control, but a boy lost in his own mistakes. But I didn't let my guard down. Not yet. Because pride doesn't vanish overnight. Waits. It rebuilds. It lashes out when cornered. I folded the claws back into the folder, slid it close to me. This ends when you decide to respect what this place truly is. Until then, I'll be here, every night, every morning. You can storm, you can rage, but you can't erase me. His eyes flickered, uncertain. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he muttered, you'll regret this, and pushed away from the table, retreating once more into the shadows of the hallway. The door to his room slammed shut. I leaned back in my chair, the cabin's silence pressing in once more. My hand rested on the folder, steady but tired. The turning point wasn't victory, not yet. It was only a shift, a reminder that battles aren't won in one strike, but in the slow wearing down of pride. Outside, the wind rattled the pines, steady and unyielding. And I thought, tomorrow would bring the finale, one way or another. The night was long. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of strangers in my cabin, glasses clinking, laughter spilling across walls that had once heard bedtime stories. And always in the background, my son's voice, cold, dismissive, certain. But dawn came anyway. The pines outside swayed in the gray light, as if reminding me that the world keeps moving, no matter how heavy your heart. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the table. The folder opened once more. The claws gleamed in the early light like a quiet promise. At 8 sharp, the sound of footsteps filled the hallway. My son appeared, shoulders hunched, eyes shadowed from a night without rest. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, staring at the folder on the table. Finally, he sat across from me, his voice cracked, low and rough. I didn't sleep, not a minute. I nodded. Neither did I. He rubbed his face with both hands, then exhaled. I thought renting this place out was a way forward, a way to keep us afloat, but last night when I saw you standing there watching strangers take over, I realized what I'd done. I stayed quiet, letting his words settle between us. He swallowed hard. I disrespected you. Worse, I erased you, and maybe I've been doing that for years without even noticing. His eyes glistened, though he blinked quickly to hide it. I'm sorry, Dad. Those 3 words hung in the air like fragile glass. I wasn't sure whether to believe them, whether to let them in. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to remind him of every cut, every slight. But another part, the part that still remembered him chasing fireflies in the yard, longed to hear those words for a lifetime. I leaned forward, resting my hand on the folder. This place isn't about profit. It's about memory. Your mother's quilt by the window, the marks on the doorframe where we measured your height every summer. These walls don't belong to Airbnb, they belong to us. He bowed his head, shame written across his face. I lost sight of that. The cabin creaked in the morning light. Outside, the first bird sang, sharp and clear. For the first time in weeks, silence felt peaceful again. I slid the folder toward him. Read it, every word. Understand what this place means legally, emotionally, historically, and then decide how you want to move forward. He opened it with trembling fingers. His eyes scanned the lines, the claws, the signatures. I saw realization dawn across his face, slow, heavy, undeniable. He looked up. You could have destroyed me with this, sold the cabin, cut me out completely. I could have, I said softly, but I didn't want destruction, I wanted respect. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes, though he tried to smile. Respect, that's harder than money. Exactly, I replied, but it lasts longer. We sat in silence, father and son, as the morning unfolded around us. The weight between us didn't disappear in an instant, but it shifted, lighter, more bearable. At last he closed the folder and pushed it back toward me. "This is yours, always was, always will be. I'll cancel the listings, no more strangers, no more disrespect." I studied his face, searching for truth, and for once I saw it there. "Good," I said quietly, "because someday this place will still be yours, but not as a rental, as a legacy." His lip quivered. He nodded, unable to speak. The sunlight broke through the window then, spilling gold across the table, catching the edges of the folder, softening the room. It felt like the cabin itself was exhaling, relieved that its walls would no longer be sold piece by piece. For the first time in years, I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried decades of love, anger, and forgiveness. His hand tightened around mine. We didn't need more words. The cabin had spoken for us. That afternoon, as I walked outside, I paused on the porch. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The lake shimmered in the distance. My son stood beside me, quiet but present, and I thought to myself, sometimes the hardest battles aren't against strangers, but against the people you love most. And sometimes victory isn't about winning, it's about remembering what's worth protecting. I turned back to the cabin, to the quilt in the window, to the memories stitched into every beam. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. So, if you're still with me at this point, thank you for listening. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about family or home or the weight of respect, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below, tell me if you've ever felt overlooked or if you've had to fight for something that mattered. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Most of all, thank you for sharing this moment with me. Until next time.